$16,400,000 hung in the air when Claire Bennett realized the painting was facing the wrong way. The auctioneer lifted his polished walnut gavel beneath the white glare of Bellamy House's winter sale room, where old money collectors sat beneath crystal chandeliers and anonymous bidders waited behind glowing phone lines. On the center platform stood Harbor at Dusk, a storm-dark canvas framed in gilded oak, and beside it stood the man who had just silenced every rival with a single raised finger. Julian Moretti did not look like a man buying art. In a tailored black suit, with 2 silent bodyguards stationed 20 feet behind him, he looked like a man reclaiming something that had been stolen. $16,400,000, the auctioneer announced. Going once. No paddle moved. No voice challenged him. Claire stood against the side wall in her plain charcoal uniform, clutching the lot ledger against her soft stomach as every warning she had received that week crowded into her mind. Do your job. Move the paintings. Record the numbers. Let qualified people make qualified decisions. Warren Bellamy had repeated those words after deleting the condition report she had filed on Lot 47. Claire had spent 11 years handling canvases that experts discussed without ever noticing the woman carrying them. She knew the weight of 18th-century oak beneath her gloves. She knew the smell of fresh adhesive hidden under old varnish. She knew when a backing board had been installed to protect a painting and when it had been installed to conceal one. Going twice. Julian's dark gaze never left the harbor painted beneath the bruised blue sky. Claire looked at the narrow line of cobalt curling over the canvas edge, at the modern staples driven beside hand-forged tacks, and at the lower corner, sitting half an inch higher than it had during intake. Someone had removed the canvas, turned it, and placed it back inside the frame. Her heartbeat struck hard against her ribs. If she stayed silent, Bellamy House would close a $16 million sale, and Julian Moretti would walk away with a lie. If she spoke, Claire would lose. The only job still keeping her inside the art world. The gavel began to fall. Stop the sale. Her voice was not loud, but the room heard it. The gavel froze above the block. Heads turned toward the plus-size clerk, standing where clerks were supposed to remain invisible. Warren Bellamy's expression hardened. Miss Bennett, return to your station. Claire set down the ledger. The lot cannot be closed. A murmur moved through the bidders. Julian finally looked at her, his face unreadable. On whose authority? Bellamy demanded. Claire met his stare. Mine, until someone proves the canvas was not reversed after authentication. Bellamy stepped toward her, but Julian raised one hand, and the entire room went still again. Claire crossed the marble floor, released the 2 brass locks on the floating frame, and turned the painting over before anyone could stop her. There was no blank protective backing beneath it. A woman's cobalt blue eye stared from the hidden canvas, vivid and unfinished, as though she had been waiting decades for someone to let her look into the room. Beneath the portrait, almost erased under dark varnish, were 2 faded initials. S.B. Julian rose so slowly that the scrape of his chair sounded louder than the auction bell. For the first time that evening, the most feared man in New York looked shaken. Claire opened her mouth to explain, but Bellamy seized the microphone. Security, he said coldly. Remove this woman. She has just vandalized a $16 million masterpiece. 3 days earlier, Claire Bennett had been standing 12 feet above the main gallery floor on a rolling ladder, fastening a condition tag to the back of a 17th-century landscape, while 2 senior specialists argued below her about which collector would pay more for it. Neither man looked up. They never did. At Bellamy House, Claire knew the exact location, weight, insurance value, and handling restrictions of nearly every work in the building. Yet most clients assumed she was there to move crates and refill pens. Her charcoal uniform stretched across her broad hips when she climbed, and the narrow service aisles forced her to turn sideways between shipping cases, but she had long ago stopped apologizing for taking up space. The people around her could stare at her body or look through her entirely. Either way, they missed what mattered. Claire had spent years learning how paintings told the truth when people did not. Old canvas carried pressure marks. Antique wood warped with age. Varnish changed color. Nails, glue, linen, dust, and even the direction of a brushstroke could expose a lie hidden beneath a famous name. She had once been close to completing a graduate program in art conservation, until a senior advisor blamed her for uncovering a questionable ownership record tied to one of his donors. The school called it a misunderstanding. Claire called it a warning. She left without the degree, carrying enough knowledge to recognize fraud and not enough status to be believed when she found it. Bellamy House hired her for operations because she was careful, strong, and willing to work late. Warren Bellamy praised those qualities only when they kept her silent. That Monday evening, Claire was assigned to inspect Lot 47 before the winter auction. Harbor at Dusk arrived inside a climate-controlled crate with a 6-page condition report and a history that looked almost too clean. The catalog claimed the painting had remained untouched in the same frame for more than 40 years. Claire placed it beneath the examination lights and immediately felt something was wrong. A thin ribbon of cobalt paint curled around the upper edge of the canvas where no finished composition should have reached. Several dark, hand-forged tacks had been removed and replaced with bright modern staples. The backing board smelled faintly of fresh adhesive, though the paperwork listed no recent conservation work. Claire measured the corners twice. The lower left side sat nearly half an inch higher than the intake photograph, taken only 4 months earlier. Someone had opened the frame, moved the canvas, and covered the evidence with professional care. She documented every inconsistency, attached close photographs, and submitted a formal hold request. 20 minutes later, her report vanished from the internal system. Warren Bellamy summoned her to his glass office overlooking the gallery. He did not invite her to sit. He told her that respected experts had already authenticated the work, that important clients were flying in for the sale, and that operations staff were not paid to invent problems. Claire asked who had replaced the backing board. Bellamy smiled without warmth and reminded her that the certification committee would soon review her application. Then he told her to leave Lot 47 alone. At closing time, the lights dimmed across the gallery and the last specialists departed. Claire remained beside the painting, staring at the new screws in its frame. Keeping her job required silence. Keeping her integrity required one more look. She pulled on her white gloves, unlocked the examination cabinet, and opened the transportation log. The final entry stopped her cold. 6 weeks earlier, Harbor at Dusk had spent one unrecorded night inside a private storage facility owned by a company called North River Logistics. Claire knew the name. Everyone in New York shipping knew it. North River was controlled by a criminal rival of Julian Moretti. The following afternoon, Bellamy House closed its East Gallery for a private preview, and the building seemed to change the moment Julian Moretti entered. Conversations softened. Assistants lowered their eyes. Even Warren Bellamy abandoned his usual theatrical confidence and crossed the marble floor with both hands extended, smiling like a man greeting an investor while calculating the distance to the nearest exit. Julian wore a black overcoat over a precisely tailored suit, but he carried no visible display of wealth beyond the quiet certainty that everyone around him already knew his name. 2 men accompanied him through the front doors, then stopped 20 feet from the exhibition room when he raised one hand. He wanted to see Lot 47 alone. Claire watched from the catalog desk as Warren began reciting the approved history of Harbor at Dusk. Julian ignored him. He moved toward the painting with slow, measured steps and stopped beneath the examination lights. For several seconds, his expression revealed nothing. Then his gaze fixed on a narrow red mark near the painted pier, almost hidden beneath the gray water. His shoulders became still. Claire knew that reaction. Collectors admired composition, rarity, and value. Julian Moretti was looking at a memory. Warren offered champagne. Julian did not answer. He leaned closer to the canvas without touching it, studying the red mark as though it were a door he had once watched close. Claire should have remained behind the desk. Warren had already warned her twice that morning not to discuss the condition report with anyone. Instead, she walked across the gallery carrying the intake folder against her chest. Warren noticed immediately. "Miss Bennett, we do not need operations support in here." Julian turned before she could retreat. His eyes moved from her face to the folder and back again. They were dark, controlled, and far more attentive than the dismissive glances Claire received from most men in expensive rooms. "You handled the painting," he said. It was not a question. Claire nodded. Warren stepped between them with a polite laugh. "Our staff follows strict procedures, Mr. Moretti. Everything has been fully authenticated." Claire looked at Julian. Authentication and handling history are not the same thing. The room went silent. Warren's smile disappeared. Julian studied her for another moment, then asked Warren to leave them. Warren refused with such careful language that it almost sounded like agreement, but Julian only looked toward the door. A few seconds later, Warren walked out, taking his wounded pride with him. Claire remained beside the painting. "Why are you bidding on it?" she asked. Julian's expression cooled. "That is not part of your job. Neither is stopping someone from buying a questionable canvas, according to my employer." Something shifted in his gaze, not amusement exactly, but recognition. He turned back toward the harbor scene. "My mother painted in a studio near Pier 9 before she married my father. She used that shade of red in every work she kept for herself." Claire looked at the tiny mark again. The catalog attributes this painting to Edwin Shaw. The catalog says many things. His voice lowered. "This canvas was in my mother's studio the last week she worked there. Then it disappeared. Years later, Shaw became famous for it." Claire understood then. Julian was not trying to acquire another valuable object. He was attempting to recover the final piece of a woman whose history had been rewritten by people with better names and louder voices. "If you believe it belonged to her, why not challenge the attribution?" she asked. "Because challenges become headlines, and headlines become leverage. I intend to buy it, remove it from circulation, and end the matter." Claire felt a familiar anger rise beneath her ribs. Men with power always believed silence became noble when they could afford it. "Buying it will not end anything," she said. "It will reward whoever hid the truth." Julian faced her fully. The distance between them felt charged, not with threat, but with two wills refusing to yield. "Do you have proof?" he asked. Claire thought of the altered tax, the fresh backing board, and the missing night at North River Logistics. "Not yet." His gaze stayed on hers. "Then do not stand between me and that painting." Claire closed the folder. "Give me until the auction." Julian looked once more at the red mark near the pier. "When the gavel falls, your time is over." By the time the winter auction began, Claire had slept less than 4 hours and trusted almost no one inside Bellamy House. Her access to the conservation database had been restricted. The photographs from her deleted report were missing from the shared archive. Warren Bellamy had stationed a senior specialist beside Lot 47, as though the painting required protection from Claire rather than from the people who had altered it. She spent the first hour recording bids with steady hands while collectors filled the marble room beneath crystal chandeliers. Julian Moretti sat in the third row, silent and composed, his attention fixed on the stage. He did not acknowledge Claire, but she remembered his warning. When the gavel fell, her time would be over. The bidding began at $8 million and climbed with frightening speed. An anonymous caller challenged Julian until the price passed $14 million. Claire watched Warren each time the caller raised the amount. He never looked surprised. He looked relieved. At $16,400,000, the caller withdrew. The auctioneer raised the gavel. Claire saw the cobalt line at the canvas edge, the uneven corner, and the faint shadow beneath the recently installed backing. Every sensible instinct told her to remain silent. She had no degree, no title, and no protection. Warren had made certain the room would see her as an unstable employee interrupting experts who knew better. Then Claire thought of the red mark near Pier 9 and the woman whose work might disappear into another private vault. She stepped away from her station. Her order to halt the sale cut through the room just before the gavel reached the block. Warren commanded her to return, but Claire crossed the stage and released the brass frame locks. She turned the canvas with both gloved hands, careful not to touch the painted surface. The hidden portrait appeared beneath the lights. A woman in a red coat stood near a waterfront, her face unfinished except for one vivid cobalt eye. Two faded initials rested near the lower edge. Julian rose from his chair. Warren moved toward the platform and announced that Claire had compromised the lot. He called for security and demanded that the painting be removed immediately. Claire placed herself beside the frame without touching it again. "Nobody moves this work until the condition is documented," she said. Julian approached the stage, and the room opened around him. His gaze remained on the portrait. "That is my mother," he said quietly. Warren insisted the image was an insignificant study and claimed Claire had created confusion by mishandling the frame. Julian turned toward him with a stillness that made Warren stop speaking. "I am taking the painting," Julian said. Claire faced him. No. Every person in the room seemed to stop breathing. Julian looked at her as if no one had denied him in years. Claire forced her voice to remain level. If it leaves under your control, Bellamy House will claim the evidence was altered. The attribution, the initials, and every mark on that canvas will become impossible to defend. You will have the painting, but you will lose the truth. Warren seized on her words and accused her of inventing procedures to hide professional misconduct. Claire ignored him. She requested an independent conservator, a representative from the insurer, full photographic documentation, and a sealed chain of custody before the work moved 1 inch. Julian could have ordered the room cleared. He could have used fear to take what he wanted. Instead, he studied Claire, then lowered his hand before either of his men could approach. Seal it, he told the auctioneer. Warren protested, but Julian did not look away from Claire. For the first time, he was allowing someone else to control the fate of the object he had crossed the city to possess. As the insurer prepared the temporary seal, Claire checked the frame registration number against the intake record. The number did not belong to Bellamy House. It belonged to Moretti Maritime. Claire stared at the registration number until the noise of the auction room seemed to fade behind her. Moretti Maritime had owned the frame at some point, but the intake file contained no mention of the company. Julian read the number over her shoulder, and the controlled stillness in his face tightened. Warren Bellamy immediately claimed it was a clerical error, but Claire closed the frame record before he could reach for it. This work goes to an independent laboratory, she said. Not one chosen by Bellamy House, and not one controlled by the Moretti family. Warren objected. Julian did not. He asked Claire what she required. She gave him 4 conditions in front of the insurer, and every witness still gathered near the platform. None of his employees would touch the painting. No one would threaten or pressure the auction staff. Every test, seal, photograph, and transfer would be recorded. Most importantly, if the evidence damaged the Moretti name, it would still be released. A cold murmur passed through the room. Men with Julian's reputation were not given terms by auction clerks, especially not in public. Julian studied Claire for a long moment. Agreed, he said. Warren looked more alarmed by that single word than by the hidden portrait. Before midnight, the sealed painting was transported to Calder Conservation Institute in Brooklyn, escorted by the insurer, a museum registrar, and 2 vehicles that remained far enough behind to satisfy Claire's rules. She traveled in the conservation van beside the painting, checking the tamper seals at every stop. Julian followed in another car. He did not ask her permission to protect the route, but he did not interfere with the evidence. At the laboratory, Claire worked beside Dr. Evelyn Hart, an independent conservator with no connection to Bellamy House. Under magnification, the strange details became a pattern. The modern staples had been installed after the canvas was removed from its stretcher. The dark varnish over the initials was much newer than the paint beneath it. Infrared imaging revealed the full outline of the hidden woman, including both hands resting on a pier railing and a second signature buried beneath the harbor scene. Pigment testing showed that the portrait had been painted nearly 7 years before the landscape attributed to Edwin Shaw. The hidden work was not an abandoned sketch. It came first. Julian stood behind the glass partition while Claire and Evelyn documented each result. He did not interrupt. He did not demand faster answers. When Claire stepped out after 6 hours beneath the laboratory lights, he offered her coffee and waited until she accepted before speaking. You knew where to look, he said. I knew something was wrong, Claire replied. Those are not the same thing. Julian glanced through the glass at the portrait of his mother. Most people in that room saw $16 million. Most people see what they expect to see. His gaze returned to her, steady and unreadable. Claire had spent years being examined as though her body explained everything about her. Julian looked at her differently now, not softly and not with pity. He looked at her as if every word required attention. The awareness unsettled her more than his reputation did. When the laboratory prepared to close, he offered to have a driver take her home. Claire refused because the final seal had not been logged. Julian did not insist. He simply remained in the hallway until she finished. Near dawn, Evelyn called them back to the examination table. Beneath the lower stretcher bar, she had found an old repair stamp pressed into the wood. Claire cleaned the mark carefully and read the faded lettering aloud. The frame had been restored 20 years earlier at a private workshop owned by Anthony Moretti, Julian's father. The repair stamp changed the investigation from a question of attribution into an accusation against two powerful families. Julian stood motionless beside the examination table while Dr. Evelyn Hart photographed the mark, and Claire compared it with the old Moretti Maritime registration number found on the frame. The dates matched. 20 years earlier, the stretcher had entered a private restoration workshop owned by Anthony Moretti, then disappeared from every public record until Bellamy House listed it under Edwin Shaw. Julian asked for access to the complete transport archive. Claire reminded him that the original evidence had to remain under independent control. He accepted a certified copy without argument, though the restraint cost him more than anger would have. By noon, Claire had traced the frame number to a handwritten ledger stored in the basement records room of a shipping company Moretti Maritime had acquired years ago. The building overlooked the Brooklyn waterfront, all steel windows, gray river light, and locked cabinets that smelled of dust and salt. Julian opened the archive for her, but he stayed several feet away while she worked. Page after page recorded paintings, crates, and private transfers disguised as household freight. Then Claire found the entry. Harbor Canvas, studio of Sophia Bell, transferred to Bellamy Fine Arts in settlement of outstanding obligation. Authorized by Anthony Moretti. Julian read the line twice. His face did not change, but the silence around him became heavier. My father told me the painting was stolen after my mother left, he said. Claire looked at the notation beneath the transfer. It was not stolen. It was surrendered. A second document made the truth worse. Anthony Moretti had used the painting to settle a debt with Warren Bellamy's father, then required Sophia to sign a confidentiality agreement that denied her any future claim to the work. In exchange, the Moretti family protected Julian from being named in a criminal investigation surrounding his father's business. Sophia had not abandoned her art because she lacked courage or talent. She had traded her name to keep her son outside the consequences of a world he had been born into. Julian turned toward the river. For years, he had believed he was recovering something taken from his family. Now he understood that his family had helped erase the woman he wanted to honor. Claire felt sympathy for him, but sympathy could not become permission. The report must include this, she said. Julian faced her again. If it becomes public, Bellamy will say my father owned the work legally. Then the evidence will show why legal ownership is not the same as honest authorship. It will also damage my mother's name. Only if you decide the shame belongs to her. The words landed between them with more force than any accusation. Julian stepped closer, then stopped before entering her space. Do you intend to release everything? Claire met his gaze. That depends on whether you want your mother's truth, or only the part that makes your family innocent. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Julian finally asked for the full file. Claire gave him a copy and locked the originals inside a tamper-sealed case. He did not challenge her decision. When she returned to Calder Conservation that evening, an official notice waited in her inbox. The certification committee had opened a disciplinary investigation against her for alleged manipulation of a client's property and unauthorized contact with the press. Attached were 12 messages sent from an account bearing her name. Claire read them once, then again. The language sounded almost convincing, but she had never written a single one. Claire did not panic when she saw the forged messages. Panic was useful to people who wanted her careless. She printed every page, photographed the metadata, and compared the timestamps with the laboratory access log. 3 of the messages had supposedly been sent while she was inside the imaging room, where personal devices were prohibited and recorded in a locked cabinet. Someone had built a convincing lie, but not a complete one. Julian arrived at Calder Conservation 20 minutes later and found Claire seated beneath the cold white lights, arranging the evidence in chronological order. He read the disciplinary notice without interrupting. Bellamy is trying to remove you before the report is finished, he said. He is trying to make the report look contaminated, Claire replied. Julian offered to make the accusation disappear. Claire understood exactly what he meant, even though his voice remained calm. No pressure, no threats, and no private favors, she reminded him. If the committee reverses course because they fear you, then Bellamy still wins. They will say I survived because a powerful man protected me. Julian folded the notice and placed it beside the forged emails. Then tell me what you need. Time, verified records, and everyone following the rules. Before he could answer, the laboratory alarm sounded. Red warning lights flashed across the ceiling, and an automated voice ordered the building to evacuate because of a possible electrical fire. Dr. Evelyn Hart rushed from the imaging suite while staff began moving toward the stairwell. At the loading entrance, 3 men in gray transportation uniforms appeared with a rolling art crate and an emergency transfer order. The document carried the signature of Calder's director and instructed them to move the painting to a secure insurance facility in Queens. Everything about the order looked official. The letterhead was correct. The authorization number matched the insurer's format. Even the tamper seals appeared genuine. Evelyn reached for the release clipboard, but Claire stopped her. Printed beneath the transfer code was the original auction lot number from before Bellamy House revised the winter catalog. That number had never appeared in any public document. Only someone with access to the deleted internal report could have used it. "This order is false," Claire said. One of the transport workers insisted they had been dispatched because of the alarm. Claire asked him to identify the receiving registrar. He gave a name belonging to a woman who had retired 8 months earlier. Julian's security team appeared at the far end of the corridor, but he raised one hand and kept them back. He had promised not to interfere with the chain of custody, and Claire saw him choose restraint when force would have been easier. She locked the painting inside the laboratory's fire-rated evidence vault, entered a temporary emergency seal, and transmitted the documentation directly to the insurer's fraud division. The alarm ended 3 minutes later. No fire was found. The transportation crew attempted to leave, but insurance investigators were already on their way, and building security secured the exits without confrontation. Inside the abandoned art crate, officials found routing documents connected to North River Logistics, the same company that had held the painting for one unrecorded night. Bellamy's forgery operation and Julian's rival were no longer separate problems. They were parts of the same machine. When the corridor finally emptied, Claire handed Julian the complete technical report, including the page bearing his father's signature. "I am trusting you with this," she said. Julian accepted it carefully. "You should not." Claire held his gaze. "I am not trusting your reputation. I am trusting the choice you made today." For the first time, Julian had no answer ready. The emergency hearing began 48 hours later inside Bellamy House, beneath the same chandeliers that had once made Claire feel like part of the furniture. This time, every chair faced her. Representatives from the insurer, the certification committee, the museum ethics board, and 3 major newspapers filled the front rows. The restored canvas stood inside a sealed, transparent frame at the center of the room, positioned so both painted surfaces could be seen. Warren Bellamy sat behind a polished table with 2 attorneys and the calm expression of a man who still believed status could outlast evidence. Before the hearing opened, he asked to speak with Claire privately. He offered to withdraw the complaint against her, fund her certification, and appoint her head of auction operations. All she had to do was confirm that the hidden portrait belonged to Sophia Bell and remove every reference to North River Logistics, the forged transfer, and Anthony Moretti. Claire understood the temptation. One signature could restore everything she had lost. It could also preserve the machine that had erased another woman before her. "You are offering me a better seat inside the same lie," she said. Warren's expression hardened. "Without this house, you are nobody in this industry." Claire looked through the glass doors at the waiting audience. "Then the evidence will have to introduce me." When the hearing began, Warren described her as an emotional employee with incomplete training who had exceeded her authority. He reminded the committee that Claire had no advanced degree and suggested that attention from Julian Moretti had influenced her judgment. Claire did not defend her personality. She presented facts. She showed the modern staples beside the original hand-forged tacks. She explained how the pigment on the hidden portrait predated the harbor scene by nearly 7 years. Infrared images revealed the buried signature beneath the newer varnish. Shipping records connected the frame to Bellamy Fine Arts, Moretti Maritime, and North River Logistics. Building logs proved the forged messages had been sent while Claire's telephone was secured outside the imaging room. The false transportation order used a lot number available only inside Bellamy House. Each piece alone invited an excuse. Together, they formed a history no reputation could silence. Warren claimed the Moretti ledger had been manipulated to damage him. The chairwoman turned to Julian. "Does your family dispute the authorization signed by Anthony Moretti?" The room became completely still. Julian could have protected his father's name with one denial. Instead, he stood beside the aisle, without his security team, and looked at the portrait of his mother. "The signature is genuine," he said. "My father transferred the work. My family benefited from her silence." Warren's confidence finally broke. The committee suspended Bellamy House's authority to conduct the sale and referred its financial records for independent investigation. Sophia Bell was provisionally recognized as the creator of the hidden portrait, pending final scholarly review. Claire's disciplinary case was dismissed, but the chairwoman offered no apology for believing the accusations so quickly. Claire did not ask for one. She asked that every disputed work handled through the same shipping network be re-examined. After the room emptied, Julian remained beside the two-sided canvas. "My family has no right to hide it again," he said. "Who should own it?" Claire looked at the woman in the red coat, finally facing the light. "No one who plans to keep only one side visible." 6 months later, the hidden portrait stood beneath museum lights where no private collector could turn it toward a wall. The canvas rested inside a custom glass frame that rotated slowly on a steel axis, revealing the gray harbor attributed to Edwin Shaw on one side, and the woman in the red coat painted by Sophia Bell Moretti on the other. Visitors gathered around it in silence, watching one history give way to another. The exhibition label did not protect the Bellamy name or excuse the Moretti family. It explained how ownership records had been manipulated, how an artist had been pressured into surrendering her claim, and how a painting had carried the truth on its hidden face for 2 decades. At the bottom of the label appeared a second name, Provenance Research, directed by Claire Bennett. Claire stood near the entrance in a deep blue dress tailored to her broad shoulders and full figure, no longer wearing the charcoal uniform that had once marked her as someone expected to remain behind the scenes. The independent review of Bellamy House had uncovered 11 other works with altered records. Warren Bellamy had lost control of the company, and every disputed sale connected to North River Logistics was being examined. The certification committee had offered Claire immediate admission to complete her credentials, but she had accepted only after they adopted new protections for employees who reported provenance concerns. She did not return to Bellamy House. Instead, a coalition of museums and insurers appointed her director of the Bell Center for Provenance Integrity, an independent organization built around the methods she had used to protect Sophia's painting. No one had purchased the position for her. No powerful man had ordered the art world to respect her. Claire had earned the authority through evidence, restraint, and the decision to tell the complete truth when a safer version had been placed within reach. Julian Moretti had made a difficult choice of his own. He transferred his family's claim to the painting into a public trust, with the condition that both sides remain visible and that Sophia's authorship never again be separated from the story of how it had been erased. He also released the remaining Moretti shipping archives for independent review, knowing they might reveal further damage caused under his father's leadership. It cost him alliances, privacy, and the illusion that loyalty required silence. In return, he recovered something more honest than possession. He gave his mother back her name. During the opening reception, Julian remained beyond the crowd in a simple black suit, without bodyguards beside him and without attempting to command Claire's attention. He watched curators approach her with questions, watched young researchers ask about her methods, and watched former Bellamy clients wait patiently for the woman they had once ignored. Claire noticed him only after the final speech ended. Their eyes met across the gallery, but Julian did not cross the room. Months earlier, he would have believed wanting something gave him the right to reach for it. Now he waited. Claire moved through the guests until she stood before him. "You stayed in the back," she said. "Tonight belongs to you and my mother," Julian replied. "I did not want to take space that was not offered." Claire looked toward the rotating canvas. Sophia's cobalt eye passed into view, followed by the harbor that had concealed her. "You finally learned that not everything valuable needs an owner." Julian's expression softened. "I had a patient teacher. Claire could have left him there. She owed him no reward for making the honorable choice. What had grown between them was not a debt, a bargain, or a victory claimed by either side. It had been built through boundaries respected, truths endured, and trust offered only after it was earned." Claire extended her hand. Julian accepted it without pulling her closer. Together they walked toward the painting, not as a hidden clerk and a feared kingpin, but as two people willing to stand beside the full truth. Behind the glass, the canvas continued turning, ensuring that no woman would ever again be remembered only by the side others chose to display. What would you have done in Claire's place if telling the whole truth could restore your dignity but destroy the protection offered by powerful people? Share your choice in the comments, and tell us which city or country you are watching from. If you believe respect must be earned through honesty, restraint, and courage rather than status or fear, subscribe to hear more stories about overlooked women who refuse to remain invisible.